Jeszcze raz witam
once
Państwa
again,
serdecznie
welcome
w imieniu
on
organizatorów
behalf of the organizers
konferencji CEROC
of the CEROC
2021
2021 conference,
Energetyki Wiatrowej.
PWEA.
Witam szczególnie
I'd like to
serdecznie
especially
pana
welcome
ministra Zbigniewa
Minister
Gryglasa z
Zbigniew Gryglas
Ministerstwa
from the
Aktywów
Ministry
Państwowych.
of State Assets. Welcome.
And please let me welcome His Excellence Ambassador of Norway, Mr. Anders Eide. Yes. Today's event is dedicated to cooperation that we will have in construction of Polish offshore industry, cooperation that will take place between Norway and Poland. I'm particularly happy to announce this workshop, this panel discussion, because we believe that international cooperation has a very important place in development of Polish offshore sector. Poland has a very attractive energy market and attractive natural condition for development of offshore wind. International players, international investors, countries like Norway has a lot of experience in that sector that is ready to share with us, share with Poland, to make our journey into the offshore wind industry and offshore energy the most profitable and most advantageous for all our citizens and energy consumers. This event is co-hosted by Norwegian Embassy and also by Norwegian Energy Partners. I have here with me Jørgen Theodorsen, who is leading the wind energy division of Norwegian Energy Partners, and I'd like to welcome him to the stage and say a few words of introduction to our audience. Later on, we will switch into the panel discussion that will be led by my colleague from Polish Wind Energy Association, Mr. Piotr Czopek is here also. So let's start. Jørgen, the mic is yours.
So, hello everybody. Nice to see you all in 3D after spending the last 18 months on Teams. So this is fairly new. So it's good to see all of you here today. So welcome to this seminar, and thank you for the introduction, by the way. So welcome to this seminar run by the Norwegian Energy Partners, also called the NOVAP, with the Royal. We co-host this together with the Royal Norwegian Embassy in Warszawa. So my name is Jørgen Theodorsen. I work within NOVAP. I especially focus on the region within Poland, Sweden, Italy, Brazil, Finland, and the rest of the Baltics. So what is NOVAP? Norwegian Energy Partners is a non-commercial foundation. It's jointly financed by the Norwegian government and the industry, which is quite unique. Our mission is to establish and to strengthen the Norwegian energy industry international business activity. And we have over 300 partners and member companies, mainly from the Norwegian offshore industry, energy and maritime industry. Norway is often known to and has a world-leading and recognized technology within areas such as maritime logistics, ship design, healthy, safety, and also digitalization, to name a few. Our energy history is based on hydropower for more than 130 years, together with the offshore oil and gas activity, which is probably known to most of you. And that goes track all the way back to the 1960s. So to sum up in 3 words or 3 sentences what we do, we provide market and project information to Norwegian industry and Norwegian partners. We map the Norwegian competence and technology and fit that need with the global energy industry. and we create dialogues between the Norwegian industry and international partners and clients, such as many of you representing in the audience here now. A little bit, just to touch base on the global perspective, the current installed fleet is 33 gigawatts. And by the end of the decade according to Rystad, it will be 250 gigawatt will be added to this, and $810 billion in new project. And if we look further down the road, there is another 250 gigawatt coming. So giving the total number of 550 gigawatts globally according to RCG. So these are huge numbers, and yeah, is the industry ready for this? And many call this this area which we are, or decade we are in now, the tools, when we use the digitalization and other tools, they call it the tools of the fourth industrial revolution. So pool, the offshore wind market in pool is in an interesting phase. They are attracting many large international market players such as Equinor and also Ørsted, which we just heard from. And the total capacity that has been awarded is 5.9 gigawatt. In Norway, we have just released 4.5 gigawatt in the latest round. So harnessing from areas such as Norwegian oil and gas industry and a maritime history, Norwegian companies have worked closely in the past with industries such as the yard industry here in Pool, earlier with proven results. Today you will hear from the Norwegian Embassy and 4 Norwegian companies. These companies are Equinor, present in the audience here, DNV, Kongsberg and DNB. All of these companies has great solutions to help you as a partner within the area of offshore wind. We hope that bringing customers and suppliers together to share good and useful information with each other through seminars like this can contribute to the ambitious goals that I described earlier. I'm sure this webinar will be very interesting for all of you. After this event, for your information, there will be a lunch in the room called Aquarium. This is from, we are a little bit behind schedule, so this is from 4:30 to 4. So I encourage you, and I hope to see many of you there. I will now give the word to the Norwegian Ambassador to Poland, Mr. Anders Eide. Further, you will hear from Equinor with Vidar Birkeland, Project Director, together with his country manager for Equinor Poland, Mikael. After that, you will hear from DNV with Mikael Gronert, Senior Engineer from DNV. And you will get interesting insight in the panel discussion from DNV and Kongsberg. So for now, stay safe, stay healthy, and have a great day.
Thank you, Jørgen. 3 weeks ago, the IPCC made clear that we will reach 1.5 degrees global warming, not in the distant future, but within 2 decades. Unless, I quote, there are immediate, rapid, and large-scale reductions in greenhouse gas emissions. So, ladies and gentlemen, it's good to be here. The clean energy transition is the defining task of our generation. Time for action is now. Thanks to the Polish Wind Energy Association and Norway for organizing it today and for all of you participating. Like the IPCC, I believe we have a window of opportunity, not least in Europe and here in Poland. First, because we have a common European plan. It's ambitious, it comes with carrot and sticks, and it's designed to give us the transition we all want, one that is just and efficient, and that will help us build green competitiveness. My government embraces the European Green Deal, and so do actually leading Norwegian businesses, which are more often proponents of stricter environmental standards than the opposite. Stricter standards mean more innovation, more competitive edge. Second, we have a Polish plan. I will leave to Minister Gryglas and others here to elaborate, but let me say the following. You have a massive transformation ahead, but you also have great conditions for offshore wind here in Poland. You have public support, you have the PEP 2040 plan, and you also have the offshore wind law. From Norway, we are ready to be your partner on the basis of transparent and predictable market regulations, and of course, a level playing field. Just as Polish companies successfully operate as our partners on the Norwegian continental shelf on an equal footing there, we expect that the framework for offshore wind here in Poland will be equally conducive to broad participation from Norwegian companies on a level playing field. My third point, and allow me to express a certain optimism here. I believe that these days we are seeing the beginning of a strategic Polish-Norwegian energy partnership. I'll highlight two particular developments. One is the construction of Baltic Pipe, which will provide Poland with natural gas from Norway and strengthen Polish energy security. The second is, of course, Equinor's participation with Polenergia in Baltic 1, 2, 3, and their intention to further deepen their presence in Poland. I'll leave for Equinor's Michał Kołodziejczyk to elaborate in a moment. But in addition to Equinor, we have also, of course, numerous Norwegian companies, many of you presented here today, ready to contribute with know-how and experience in partnership with Polish entities. If we manage this partnership well, we will not only succeed in a cost-effective energy transformation and reach our climate targets, we will also create green growth, jobs, innovation, and revenues here in Poland. And I believe that offshore wind is obviously not the only sector we can cooperate in. There are massive opportunities also in other renewables, in green shipping, carbon capture and storage, and more. If we do this right, we could indeed see the emergence of a Baltic clean energy cluster in Poland in the years to come. So, ladies and gentlemen, Poland and Norway share strategic interests. We have long traditions as close partners in NATO, in the internal market, and in the EEA and Norway grants here in Poland. We share trust and we share confidence. So Norway is ready to be not a partner, but the key partner in Poland's clean energy transformation ahead. Thank you.
Ambassador, we have some more presentations, so we'll be more comfortable to.
Mamy jeszcze kilka prezentacji.
Thank you very much, Mr.
Potem zaprosimy pana ambasadora na scenę. Bardzo dziękuję, panie ambasadorze.
Mr. Michał Kołodziejczyk, the country manager of Equinor, to share his perspective as one of the leading energy players in Norway and also in Poland on development of offshore and onshore business of Equinor in Poland. Michał?
Welcome everyone. First of all, I actually wanted to say that I'm very excited to see people in flesh and body in here after such a long period of time. I think COVID has taken a toll on all of us, ourselves. We have two colleagues here from Norway and the UK. You will see Vidar and Hannah Mary, and it's been 18 months. They have not been able to travel, and I guess many of you are in the same position, so really pleased to welcome you. I will say a few words about Equinor and then leave to Vidar to talk about our project. Norwegian state and Equinor, since its establishment, really was focusing on a socially responsible way to develop natural resources. And that is one of the reasons why company has taken direction to look for how can we actually help and assist societies worldwide to go through this energy transition. And the same is with the Polish market, where we want to play its part. We always want to do it in a safe manner, and we want, wherever we go, create lasting value through what we do. In this particular case, it is the energy transition. We do it through the competence that we have been able to build over the last decades, where we have developed the oil and gas in Norway. Again, safety is always our priority. We bring experience from large project management into the table, and obviously the financial strength of the company. We have entered Poland a couple of years ago. It was in 2018 that we have signed up a partnership with a local independent producer, Polenergia, where we have entered Baltic 2 and 3, the early licenses in Poland, where it comes to offshore wind, and later on topped it up with Baltic 1. We've recognized Poland as the market that will undergo a transition, energy transition. Poland has all the right fundamentals. It has beautiful wind resources in the Baltic Sea. It has a very good supply base that needs to be developed, but it's already there, and a lot of competence in the maritime industry. We believe that Poland really offers way more than offshore wind, and hence we have taken a decision recently to also engage ourselves in the onshore development in Poland through the acquisition of Vento, which is again an independent company developing solar wind parks, and hopefully time could show that we can also re-engage ourselves through Vento in the development of onshore wind in Poland. Again, we believe that it's a fantastic resource, both the offshore and onshore wind, that can be developed in Poland beyond the other technologies such as carbon capture storage or hydrogen or electrical storage, that we can contribute and really offer our skills and deepen Polish and Norwegian energy cooperation. I will not keep you waiting for the presentation that you probably want to see, and that is more about our Baltic 2 and 3 projects. So Vidar, please come and join me here.
Thank you, Michael. It's good to be back. As you said, the last time was March 2020. And actually I barely came home because it was one guy who was been on a plane, but the other guy was infected by COVID, so he had to stay there for 2.5 hours in the plane. So it's good to be back. And I think also last time we was together in one of the conferences, we really hope that we have that CFD regime in place, and we have. So I think that's a very important milestone actually for moving this project forward. So who am I? I'm Vidar Birkeland. I'm the project director on behalf of the joint venture between Polenergia and Equinor, where it's a 50-50 joint venture, where Equinor is the manager, and we are using our management system in general. But we have an integrated team with both Equinor and Polenergia people, and also where then Polenergia people has some certain responsibilities within that integrated team. So that's fruitful for the project and for both parties. This is some key data for the project. We have monopiles as our base case. We have an AC system. We are not that far from shore. And we have about 100 VTGs in total for Baltic 2 and 3. We intend to develop them in parallel. There are 2 separate SPVs, but for a project execution point of view, we will develop them as one project as far as possible. We have 2 offshore substations, as mentioned. I'll come a little bit back to that one, and also 1 onshore substation. If you look at the timeline, as I mentioned, we've got the support regime in place with a maximum strike price, I think it was June this year. And we plan to have the building permit and final investment decision within first half of 2024. That's the plan. And then hopefully we have the first power in 2027 and COD late 2027 or in the first half of 2028. So this is a kind of visualization of the concept. We have the VTGs with foundation, as I mentioned. We have 2 substations, one for each Baltic 3 and Baltic 2. We have an O&M base, which I'm coming back to. And we have then the landfall and the onshore cables to onshore substation. We have secured that onshore substation, and we also have a grid connection agreement now for Baltic 2 and 3. So this is our O&M base. We have secured the area at Leba. So we have already started some planning work, and we have cleaned up the area, and we are now in the initial planning to develop this. And then, of course, when we develop this, the major part of that will be local content, no doubt about that. So that's, I think, very good, and we have also used local to clean up now in the beginning. I think that's important, and I think in also our safety application, it was very clear that the majority of the work that you need to do on that base will be local content. So it's for us, it's an area sport. We was actually looking at several areas, but we found that Leba was the best. It was the shortest distance to both Baltic 3 and Baltic 2. It's open and non-restricted connection to the sea, and I think those was 2 of the criteria that made us making this conclusion. I think this is also a major milestone for us, and it's Equinor Polska who has bought it, but it will develop then the O&M base also for the Baltic 2 and 3. And as was mentioned here earlier, we also have Baltic 1, which will come later. Hopefully that will be in the auction. That's, I think, is planned for 2025. Then I will say a few words about our procurement strategy. We have had several supplier days. We had in 2019 where we could sit together in Gdynia. I think it was 200 to 300 people participating. And then we have had a lot of meetings, and we also had a virtual supplier day in 2020, where we then invited both Tier 1 suppliers and local suppliers within each main building block. And our strategy is to really to connect Tier 1 suppliers with local suppliers, as also I think it was mentioned by Ørsted. Because we see that it is a limited number of Polish companies today that can take the EPC role. We have scanned that in the market, so it's important that you are in connection with the potential Tier 1 suppliers. We will continue to do this, and we have made our own estimate on the local content. I think it was also mentioned by Ørsted about, of course, the onshore part. We, as Equinor, have a long experience with Polish industry through the oil and gas industry. We are building structure for many, many years. So we will, of course, build on that one too, and we see very clearly that it's a potential. And we also see, when we discuss with the main suppliers, that some of them actually have a supply chain within Poland for part of their product. And we have been very clear that, of course, we have to be according to the EU regulations, but there are clear expectations for maximize the local content. I think we all should understand that also as foreign companies. And if you look to Norway, I think we develop a lot through that. But one thing is, I want to say, don't let us only look at the yards. I think if you look at in Norway, the way we was able to build up competence over a long time, that is kind of the long-term consequence of, in a way, in a positive way. We have also a multi-contracting strategy, so we will have between 7 and 12 EPC contracts. As I show here, this is our draft schedule. We are in the evaluation for the VTG preferred supplier, so hopefully we will have that in place within this year. We are now working with the ESE system, which we will go for invitation to tender within third quarter, hopefully this year, and set the contract in 2022. And if you look down here, our plan today is that within, I think, 2023, we have probably set most of the big contracts. We have a qualification system, and I think we have been through that with the suppliers several times. But we are using the EPIM system, which is now, I think, called Magnet, as a pre-qualification system. And you can find it on equinor.com and also on the web pages for Baltic 2 and 3. So there you should have information. And we have also been very clear with the supplier industry that we want to advise and support if they are challenging for them to pre-qualify. So our expectation to the industry, safety, as was mentioned by Mikael, is our first priority, no doubt about that, and it always will be. We have one accident is one too much, no doubt about that. We have a qualification process, as I mentioned, with the EPIM, which I now believe, as I mentioned, called Magnet. And it's also important that we have a minimum standard for ethics, anti-corruption, sustainability, health and safety. And I think also what we see now coming more and more and becoming more and more important is also the human rights. Not only for the main contractor, but also they have responsibility for follow up their sub-suppliers. For us, these things are non-negotiables. And it was a question earlier today about Asia. I've been working in Asia myself, and yes, there are challenges, but we have been very clear with them what the expectations are, and we have several times actually stopped the work to ensure that they get the right quality. So, of course, it's more challenging, but for us, it's non-negotiable, no doubt about that. Yeah, this is just more detail about how to become a supplier, but I will just urge you to go to the website, and we are also making public the main contractors according to the law. So the ESE contract is now on the web page for Baltic 2 and 3. So I think that was the last one from my side, but again, it's very good to be back. Let's all move forward. As the ambassador mentioned, I think from the last climate report, it's urgent for all of us to contribute to that actually. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have one more presentation to go before we start our panel discussion. So I'd like to welcome Mr. Michał Gronert, the senior engineer of DNV Poland. So please go ahead.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. My name is Michał Gronert. I'm representing DNV Energy Systems office in Poland. And today I would like to speak about offshore wind market development in Poland seen from the perspective of DNV. DNV is an engineering company. As you can see from those features presented in the slide, we are involved in the offshore wind industry for many years, and our market perspective is the perspective of the technical advisor. So the first wave of offshore wind projects are the projects which are currently already under development, and those are the projects which you know, 5.9 gigawatts to be installed in Poland. But what does it mean, those 5.2 gigawatts? To me, it means that Poland is potentially quite a large market. When you compare this to 7.6 gigawatts already installed in Germany, 2.6 gigawatts already installed in Netherlands, or 2.2 gigawatts installed in Belgium, 1.7 in Denmark, 5.9. If this is built, this is really like a significant offshore wind market in continental Europe. But today I would like to focus a bit more about the second wave of the potential projects, potential future developments. In our offshore wind acts, there are 11 areas defined for which it would be possible to apply for. And the total area of those locations is, again, about 820 square kilometers. If we assume the same power density, not including the technology development, there could be another 5.9 gigawatts installed in those locations, plus 2.4 gigawatts of the already permitted project planned for development by after 2030. And we looked at those projects and defined or just assessed on a very high level basis the site characteristics. And we can see that the average water depth here starts from 28 meters for the most convenient locations, but most of them are somewhere between 40 and 55 meters, which means that you can probably not always consider the monopiles. Those would be as a foundation. Those would be probably a bit too expensive, but jacket is a feasible technology. You not necessarily have to think about floating for those water depths, because this is just like what is already planned somewhere in the most advanced, more advanced markets at the moment. One of the convenient factors is long-term mean significant wave height. It's very low in our region, and this means that the loads to the offshore structures will be way lower than for those in the North Sea. And the accessibility to the turbines during operation phase will always also be somehow easier because of the weather window. Average wind speeds are totally comparable with the North Sea, somewhere between 9 to 10 meters per second on the hub height of 140 meters. Distance to service ports, the potential future service ports, it should be somewhere around 35 to 100 kilometers. This means that those projects could be operated and maintained from shore mainly, because even for those more distant projects, you can use SES ships, survey effect ships, to get there faster and maintain all the project from shore. Distance to construction port, when we consider Polish ports, Świnoujście or Gdynia, there is 100 to 300 kilometers, which is also quite convenient. Offshore cable expert line length up to 140, 150 meters, which means that most probably the HVDC technology should be considered here. However, for some other projects, maybe some reactive power compensation solutions for the HVAC technology could be also quite an option for those projects. But those projects won't be developed alone. There are some other projects developed in the region and also globally. Before our first Polish projects will be actually constructed, there will be further development in Netherlands, in Germany, in Belgium, and this is also the opportunity for the supply value chain to get the proper experience with the larger turbines and build this supply chain to meet the expectations of those projects. When we speak about the increased turbine size and project developed after 2030s, we think that those turbines can reach probably up to 16 to 18 megawatts, and okay, sorry. So we had some technical issue probably. So the turbine size after 2030, those would probably reach 16 to 18 megawatts, which can give us some some opportunities to increase power density of those future projects. When we speak about rotor diameters around 240, 250 meters, hub height 140, 150 meters. On top of that, the technology for HVAC and HVDC is also developing, which brings cost reduction opportunities. Floating wind and green hydrogens as a global trends are also contributing to the development of the offshore wind industry in total. So why do you think the offshore wind in Poland is actually our treasure? The convincing fact are very good wind conditions, beneficial environmental conditions, lower distance to the coast than for the projects planned in many cases in the North Sea. Several projects phased together could create some synergies, and we have political will and legislation which is already in place to start those developments. But to get to our peril, we also have some challenges ahead of us. One of them is purely technical, cold winters, which has to be somehow considered by the design and also during the planning of the operations. But also the grid access is a kind of question mark because the technical potential of all those future locations is a bit greater than what we hear it is possible to be connected to the grid at the moment. Several projects develop in parallel. There we also expect that there will be some vessels availability challenge and competition for the vessels. However, those challenges could be also transferred into opportunities for example, vessel operators, because when we because there is time to develop the fleet, right? And when we think about greater water depths and bigger sizes of the wind turbines, the elements will weigh a bit more, like 1,000 tons for rotor nacelle assembly, 2,000 to 2,500 tons for the foundations, probably 5,000 tons for the topside. This means that already existing vessels like the primary called Vidar vessel built in Poland and designed also in Poland in 2013, the crane capacity of these vessels used for the turbine installation is 1,200 tons. And this may be not enough for some of the operations of those future projects, and new generation of vessels like Dimi Orion possibly with crane capacity reaching 5,000 tons may be more convenient to use, and this is probably something which industry may require. Okay, wrapping up my presentation, this map here is presenting our wind resources, and the reddish kind of area is where we have wind speed between 9 and 10 meters per second, and those are stable wind conditions for most of the locations, even though those sites located near Szczecin are also still having good wind conditions and worth considering for the future developments. And this is quite a difference when we compare this with this blue part on the onshore side with average wind speeds lower than 8 meters per second. So this is up to the industry how we will actually utilize this technical potential that we have here. Okay, so thank you once again for the opportunity to speak and present some overview of the projects, and I look forward to meeting you later on during the conference. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Michał. And now I'd like to invite my colleague from Polish Wind Energy Association, Piotr Czopek, to lead an interesting discussion panel, after which, as it was said, we invite you for a lunch, 3:30. So the floor is yours, Piotr.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. We have a bit of the schedule, so we try to be tight with our panel discussion. And let's start. Let me invite our panelists. First, His Excellency, Mr. Anders Eide, Ambassador of Norway to Poland. Mr. Ambassador. His Excellency, Mr. Minister Zbigniew Gryglas, Undersecretary of State, Ministry of State Asset. Welcome. Ms. Hannah Mary Goodland, Head of Baltic Sea Area Development, Equinor. please join us. Mr. Michał Gronert, Senior Engineer DNV, please welcome. Mr. Andres Strand, VP Business Development, Gangstein, come on, join us. And Mr. Sigurd Kaiser, Senior Vice President, DNB, Renewables and Infrastructure, Future and Tech Industry. Hello and welcome. Okay, so let's get straight to the point because, like I said, we're off the schedule, so the lunch is waiting, so let's go straight to the point. My first question to His Excellency, Mr. Ambassador, let's start from a bit of policy. Mr. Ambassador, if you could tell us how do you foresee the energy relations between Poland and Norway develop during the coming years? You mentioned about two projects, the offshore wind project and the pipe. Could you elaborate more on that, please?
Yes, as I said, and this may sound a little bit pretentious, but I do really feel that we are seeing the beginning of a strategic Polish-Norwegian energy partnership. Climate and energy, I would say. It is a bit. It's about the Baltic pipe being constructed, which will connect Poland to the Norwegian continental shelf, replace Russian gas, reduce emissions, and maybe more importantly today, Equinor's investments with the Pool Energia and Baltic 1, 2, and 3. I hope to see this develop in the years to come. I think we have solid traditions, history, especially in the maritime sector, as was mentioned here also. So everything in green shipping, in other forms of renewables like hydrogen, possibly carbon capture and storage. I think really our imagination is the only limitation here, and I think that we have a solid base to develop this together in partnership.
Yeah, that's right. We have a lot of possible cooperations, you know, and I forgot to say that we are almost neighbors. So that is also very important, that cooperation, that we have strong ties, and we should develop on that more. Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. And now let me have a question to Mr. Minister Zbigniew Gryglas. While we're discussing furious area, when we are discussing about the offshore wind in Poland, we look at Denmark and at UK and Netherlands, and we're looking at it as a success story. Could you tell us what can we learn from Norway, from their experience? They have a very strong offshore sector, not only wind but also oil and gas, that we can learn about. So could you elaborate more on that, please?
Mr. Ambassador, dear Norwegian colleagues, dear participants of this excellent meeting. We have almost every area here in Serotsk. It's a great honor to be here to discuss the offshore wind development issue, and especially our cooperation with Norwegian companies, Norwegian colleagues. As Mr. Ambassador said, we have quite a long history of our common project. Your companies were present here in downstream. We still remember the old name of your state-owned company called Statoil. For me, I will always repeat this name because it's a bit difficult to remember the new name, but I will try. Equinor is also a very good name. Our companies were present also in Norway, like POGC, Polish Oil and Gas Company, and some companies from Lotos Group. Let me mention Petrobaltic, which extracts oil also from Baltic Sea. So the history is very good, and we want to continue our cooperation in the field of also new energies, like we have this project concerning offshore wind farms. You're right. We rather follow the British, the Danish examples, but I think we should also learn a lot from your own experience, especially from the experience of this transformation path. How to transform the energy sector from this one, which we know very well from the past, to the future energy sector. As you know, our task is probably much more difficult, because we still have almost 70% of our energy production from coal. So we should really change it quite quickly. And the offshore wind is for us a real challenge. It could bring us even 20% of our energy, according to the strategic plan adopted by the government. We will have almost 20% of our energy from Baltic Sea. So I'm happy that our companies cooperate with the experience in this field, companies like Norwegian companies, because we will avoid as many as possible mistakes. We will try to do it in the best way, not only for the energy sector, but for the whole Polish economy, because I repeat it many times, for me it's not really only the energy project. It is the industrial. It is the project which will be vital for the whole Polish economy. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Minister. You mentioned about the change of name in Statoil into Equinor, which is also a part of change of strategy from the oil and gas company into the green energy producer. So let me now have a question to Ms. Hannah-Marie Goodlett from Equinor. You have a very specific approach in Equinor to build offshore clusters. You have one in UK, you have one in US. Now you are entering the Baltic Sea area, and I assume that you would like to have the same in the Baltic Sea. So could you tell me how you perceive Poland in that area? How Poland can gain from that your approach? What do you think? Whether Poland has a possibility to take part in it? Could you elaborate more on that?
Yes, thank you. And I hope, my good friend, we're going to build up that household name of Equinor in Poland, just like Statoil was a household name. It's a long journey ahead of us, but we'll get there, I'm sure. So, as you said, we have this approach to building clusters across our portfolio when it comes to offshore wind. We have one in the UK, and we're building one in the US. And the reason that we do this is to optimize on the synergies, whether that's in O&M, in facilities, in marine and logistics strategies, really trying to build a pool of dedicated and trusted suppliers, dedicated and trusted partners across a region. And the third place that we're looking and investigating to do this is in the Baltic Sea. And we see the cornerstone of that cluster success will be a strong Poland, where Equinor has a strong foundation of good projects, safe projects and efficient projects here in the foundation of the Baltic Sea, which is Poland. And I think you only need to look geographically at Poland and its situation within the Baltic Sea to see and understand how Poland could be that spider in the web. The distances of the Baltic Sea and the cooperation that exists between the countries lays a very good foundation and a very good picture to base that synergy potential on and actually make it a reality. And when Equinor looks at this political sort of playing field and also the distances, we get quite excited about what a strong Poland could do across the Baltic Sea, looking across the Baltic states, but also looking to the Nordics as well, and some of the Nordic markets that boundary within the Baltic Sea. So I do believe that Poland can be a heart and a real cornerstone within a Baltic Sea cluster. And I think that you need to look at what other industries have done across, indeed, the North Sea, within Scotland, within UK, within Norway. Scotland is also and often referred to as the energy capital, the oil and gas capital of Europe. And I believe if Poland is ambitious enough, it can elevate itself by looking at being the offshore wind leader and the offshore wind capital within the Baltic Sea, but also a front runner on offshore wind in Europe. But you need to be ambitious there, and you need to not be limited by boundaries and borders, actually. You're building an industry, you need the best in to build that industry, and that doesn't need to suffer at the sort of hand of local content. That can go hand in hand. But to build that industry, don't be limited by borders and really extend out and think about how Poland can be that sort of cornerstone of the Baltic Sea build-out, because I absolutely believe it's possible.
Thank you very much, Hannah. So fingers crossed. Hope to see the results. Thank you for that. Okay, so let's go further. Michał, you had a very nice presentation. You show all the potential, the possibilities that we have on the Baltic Sea. In fact, there are many analyses that shows that till 2050 we could have offshore like 28 up to even 45 gigawatts. That is the potential that some think tanks are showing. You have experience regarding the potential of the Baltic Sea. There are many discussions whether the Baltic is better than North Sea. Could you elaborate more on that? What are the perspectives and conditions?
Okay, so looking at the Baltic Sea, we think that it shouldn't be shy indefinitely, because when we look at the wind resources, the reason why we are considering the offshore wind projects, the wind conditions are totally comparable to what is seen in the North Sea. There is a stable wind conditions. The winds are above 9 meters per second on most of the locations, and this brings the reason to investigate further. Then we can look at the water depths, which are again similar to what is being developed in the North Sea. Again, distance to shore is our advantage, and loads that foundations should carry are lower when we speak about significant wave height, and fatigue life of those offshore structures is also the conditions for the fatigue life are also more favorable here. So we have some good arguments that those projects should be developed and considered, because there should be financially also viable to earn for the development. So
thank you. So it's great to hear that, and that's now I know why so many people today in Seretsk. Thank you for that. Let's move forward. Andreas, offshore is global market with global companies that works all around the world, but there are also need for smaller companies which act locally, and it's important to have good cooperation between the global companies and the smaller local companies. Could you tell us about your experience, how to look for the synergies in that field?
Sure. We have seen today strong offshore wind developers going into the Polish market and cooperating together with local players. However, I would advocate that the rest of the supply chain would do so as well. And don't wait, just start. Start finding your partners. So if you're a local company in Poland, supplier, considering going into the offshore wind, don't wait. Start exploring the global competence and the supply chain, and start working together with them. In Kongsted, we have done so. We have teamed up with a local player, Intermarine. So combining our Europe offshore wind know-how and our Norwegian maritime industry experience with the local knowledge strong players, Intermarine, already executed projects in Poland. So, and I think we should applaud Poland for the high ambition set in developing offshore wind. Not just a player in the Baltic area, but as a leading country for the global part. However, going from ambitions to operations, that's takes some effort, to say the least. But start cooperating and don't wait for it. And you have 3 excellent days now to do so as well. Another topic I just want to raise is, with the high ambition set by Poland, how will that affect the onshore grid? So we have seen on other established offshore wind markets, capacity issue on the onshore grid, sorry. So we would like to advocate that green hydrogen should be a topic when developing the offshore wind parks already. Don't wait for it, because that's a completely another ballpark for the supply chain to go forward to. So for local content, start talking about the green hydrogen now. Don't wait for it. So, yeah.
Thank you very much, Andreas. So this is very important. That in offshore wind sector, size doesn't matter. You can be a small, medium-sized enterprise and also gain from the development of offshore wind projects. So it's very important also for Polish companies that would like to enter the market and looking for partners from Norway or from other countries. Thank you for that. Okay, so last but not least, Sigurd Kaiser from DNB. Could you tell us more about the financing, because DNB is a very active player already on the offshore wind market, and now I assume that you would like to also enter into the Polish market, Polish project. Could you tell us a bit more about your products, about the challenges that we have in Poland?
Yes, sure I can. And you're right, DNB is very active within the renewable industry. So that means hydropower, of course, but wind and solar as well, including offshore wind. And we have done quite a lot of offshore wind financing, including the Dogger Bank projects sponsored by Equinor. So we have quite a lot of experience in financing offshore wind projects. That said, I'm very optimistic on the offshore wind projects coming up in Poland. And DNB, we are very keen to participate and finance those projects. We have a very experienced local team in Warsaw, and together with, or in close cooperation with the headquarters in Oslo, we will do our best to participate in the financing. There are 2 aspects that I would like to highlight, which I think is decisive for the interest of financing projects in Poland. One is that the offshore wind industry has gained quite of experience over the last 5-6 years. So the risk of the projects, both during construction and but also during the operation of the projects, the risk has come down. And you know, banks, they don't like risk, so that's very good. Also the second element that I think will be decisive is the support scheme that has been put in place in Poland. It's the contracts for difference scheme. It's very similar to that in UK, and so many players in the offshore wind industry, they know this scheme already, and that's very good for the Polish industry as well. One thing that differs the Polish offshore wind industry with other European jurisdictions is that the scheme, the support scheme, is in Polish zloty. And that's fine, but There is a significant amount that shall be invested into the industry. The capex for offshore wind farms is substantial, and there is a loss of liquidity in Polish zloty, but still, I think for long-term financing, perhaps that can be a small challenge. Also because some of the capex will be in other currencies than Polish zloty, so the projects, they will be exposed to currency risk. Another thing is that banks like DNB, perhaps we will not be in a position to put up the very big tickets. So a project will need more financial institutions to put together the financing for the projects.
Thank you very much. So just to sum up, we have money, we have regulations, we have experience, so there is nothing more than just starting the building of the offshore wind project in Poland. Hope to see it as soon as possible, and I hope that in a few years we can meet there and just see how it looks like on the Baltic Sea. We have the cooperation already with Norwegian partners, so I hope that we could develop on more on that and have close our ties and to have it better. We have Polish companies, Norwegian companies. Let's make a business. Thank you very much. Thank you to our panelists. And yeah, we are ready for lunch now. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Lunch. Akwarium jest. A proszę Państwa, przypominam jeszcze raz, zapraszamy na lunch do sali akwarium. Lunch
online streaming in just a moment. And let me officially open the Polish Wind Energy Association's conference. We'll have 3 days of discussions, debates on important topics related to wind power. And in a moment, we'll start 2 panels, one devoted to offshore wind. And this panel will take place here in Neil conference room. And the second panel on first floor will be devoted to onshore wind. And let me tell you, let me invite you to take part in our event on the 15th of September. Due to the signing of the sector deal announced by the government, sector deal for offshore wind, and we will have an accompanying conference that will start with an official dinner in Łazienki in Warsaw, and the next day we will have the possibility to discuss various topics that will open up, the possibilities that will open up after signing the sector deal, what this sector deal means for Polish business and how Polish companies can do business in the future. So, from Monday you'll be able to, you'll be able to register for that event. We have very limited number of participants, 120 people, but you're all invited, first come, first served. And a new feature of today's conference is carbon footprint calculation. We have been supporting sustainable development for many years by developing wind power, and we want to take one step further. We want to minimize the environmental footprint of our conference. We hope for your cooperation. Please fill the questionnaires, and we hope that in the future we'll be able to limit the carbon footprint of our future conferences. So once again, thank you very much and welcome to our conference. And let me give the floor, big applause to Kamila Tarnacka, Vice President of PWA. She will moderate the offshore session today. Good afternoon and welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the panel devoted to offshore wind. I would like to invite our speakers to take the stage. Minister Zbigniew Gryglas, Under-Secretary of State in the Ministry of State Assets, Ms. Monika Morawiecka, the CEO of PGE Baltica, Mr. Michał Kołodziejczyk, CEO of Equinor Poland, Mr. Jarosław Broda, CEO of Baltic Power, Mr. Holger Mathiesen, Head for Development of Offshore Wind for Poland and Baltic countries at RDWE Renewables. And we are waiting for Mr. Mariusz Witoński. Oh, he's here. This, the president of the Polish Offshore Wind Association. And we are waiting for Ms. Katarzyna Szwed-Lipińska, Director of Renewables Department. She's stuck in traffic, but she'll join us in just a moment. The agenda of today's panel is as follows. We would like to discuss the most important things that are happening in offshore wind. And due to the fact that Mr. Minister has some limited time and he will have to leave us soon, before we start the formal part with the presentation from Mr. Szambelańczyk that will open the discussion, before that I would like to ask Minister Gryglas. We would like to hear from you a few words about what is currently the most important thing for us. Quite recently, the Council of Ministers has indicated the installation and construction port for offshore wind in the port in Gdynia. And there have been many questions regarding the process and what it will look like. Will we manage to do it on time? And will the first projects in the Baltic Sea be able to use this port for the development of their projects. I would like to ask you for comment on this topic from on the part of the government. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome once again. Welcome to Serock. When asked by one of the journalists, I said that this is sort of our offshore Mecca, where great ideas are born and then they are transferred into reality. Over the period of recent years, we have been shaping the regulatory framework, and it's almost completed, almost closed. We need to finish the licensing procedure for new locations. I think this is very important to you, but we are looking even further into the future. We are thinking about the infrastructure, and the question that I was asked is very important now. It is an issue that is one of the most important ones for us. The infrastructure required to build wind farms, but also service infrastructure, O&M infrastructure. It is also very important, and you often emphasize that the construction process takes months and the O&M process, the operation process takes decades. So we need to be well prepared for that. But today we are mainly thinking about the main construction site, the installation terminal, installation port that will be used to prepare and to dispatch the components that will be shipped to sea to their final destination, to the installation site. It has to be prepared in Poland, and as mentioned earlier, Gdynia was selected as the port, as the location for this installation terminal, to be exact, in the outer port in Gdynia. It has to be a port terminal capable of handling several projects at the same time, not just one or two. We know that there is a number of projects that will be developed simultaneously, and in the second phase there will be even more projects under development. So this installation port has its construction is justified in economic terms. The government will do whatever possible, and we have earmarked 437 million euros in the National Recovery Plan. For that purpose, it is enough to build a modern installation terminal and to help the development of O&M ports in Łeba and Ustka. These are the main locations where money will be spent. So the straight answer to your question is yes, this infrastructure will be available, and it will be available on time. It may appear difficult, but we are following this schedule very closely, week by week, and we will shorten that time of implementation as much as possible to make it happen. I think that there will be some natural reserves. Already today, during the discussion, you have mentioned that not only in Poland, but there will be accumulation of works and orders on turbines, towers, and all the components used to build offshore wind farms. So in a natural way, some projects will be delayed. We will have a queue of projects to some extent. But I'm full of hope that this process will start in Poland, and it will be that in this process Polish ports will be used. And this affects what was most important for me, and that is the maximum benefit for the Polish economy from this process. Let me apologize, I'll have to leave you. I will wait for the summary of this panel. I will be also available for you tomorrow. However, today I will have to go back to Warsaw very soon. So thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to take the floor here, and I wish you fruitful and constructive discussion.
jak jest obok mnie pani prezes Morawiecka, to
Since
jestem pewny,
Ms. Morawiecka is next to me, I am sure that this discussion will be very focused. She's always very focused in her interventions, and she's always very reliable in her presentations on the tasks that she's implementing. Thank you very much, Mr. Minister. And we will talk about ports, supply chain, and regulations. So we will come back to you, Mr. Minister, tomorrow during the plenary session with our conclusions, and we will let you take the floor with regard to what we are discussing today.
Before we start our discussion, I'd like to ask Mr. Szambalańczyk to deliver an introductory presentation from WKB Lawyers Law Office. He will talk about the regulatory framework. He will tell us what we should be expecting. The floor is yours. Thank you. Good afternoon, Maciej Szambalańczyk is my name. Thank you for the introduction. I'm playing the supporting role for the panelists and the speakers. I'll do my best just to quickly go through where we are at as far as regulatory framework is concerned. Offshore as a whole, energy sector is highly regulated. We can complain about this, but that's the way it is around the world. That's why the regulatory framework, a stable regulatory framework, is the basis, is the foundation for the development of the sector that would be safe for the investors and to provide the right conditions for implementing your long-term strategies. The whole act has led to many debates among the investors for a few years now. The government side has also paid a lot of attention to it. At the end of the last year, we received a comprehensive legal act, which entered into force at the beginning of this year, and only then the doors were open to intensive development of offshore wind in Poland. Currently, we are at a state where this act is being applied, and we have to analyze it in depth as investors in the investment projects. As far as the Offshore Act is concerned, it's not only just a cut and paste of the RES Act, because the RES Act focused on the support scheme and allocation of public aid, while for offshore, the regulatory needs were much broader. They had to capture offshore as a specific type of investment projects in the Baltic Sea, quite innovative investment projects. So Offshore Act is not only about public aid, even though this is an important component of it, but many aspects related to the investment process and facilitating this process. And some legal sort of tax, quasi-tax, that will have to be borne by investors and operators of offshore wind farms. As far as the support scheme is concerned, nothing special here. The legislator took a rational approach. The system is modeled on the solutions we have in the RES Act in Poland, which is already functioning. We are doing away with complicated solutions and interpreting them because they have been functioning as the negative balance. It's a quasi-CFD. So the only difference from a proper CFD is that we are not entering into a contract with the state. So using administrative procedures, the investor receives the right to have their negative balance covered. The same solution is based on the RES Act, so it was easy to transpose it to the Offshore Act. So we have this mechanism of clearance, the strike price. It can be set in two ways versus the market price. When the market price is above strike price, the investor has to pay the system. In simple terms, when it goes below strike price, the investor is paid by the system. So the negative balance is covered by the state. It's a well-known mechanism to all those who are operating wind farms or PV farms onshore. So the only difference from the onshore solution is the term of support. We're talking about as many as 25 years. The good thing about it is that you can enter it in stages. You cannot do it onshore. Onshore, you have to deliver the whole wind farm to enter the system. Here, the legislator is much more flexible. You can enter it in stages, use a part of the system before the whole project is completed, provided that you construct your project properly. Also, the volume for support is different, is set differently. Onshore, you have to declare the volume of energy which should be supported, while here, offshore, it is set by the Act. It's a product of multiplying 100,000 hours on the installed capacity. So this is set, and it's very easy to calculate it. As I said, strike price for offshore is set in two ways, because the legislator decided to have the most advanced projects in the so-called first stage. It is set by the state, the strike price is set by the state. In the second stage, after 2025, strike price will be set as today onshore, based on the auction system. The first stage had to be finished until the end of June this year, so it's already passed. Fortunately, all the projects covered by the first stage achieved the right decision from the ERO president. So these investment projects are underway. Now, what can we say about stage 1? 5.9 gigawatt of installed capacity, and areas were listed in the offshore annex. Strike price was based on the ordinance, 319.6 zloty per megawatt hour. We have to remember that the mechanism of reaching the final level of support for offshore is multi-stage in the first phase. So there's the initial decision of the ERO president, and they have already been issued, but each of the investors will be obligated to have individual notification of public aid in the EC, and the level of cost and revenue will be verified. Following the decision of the European Commission, you have to return to the ERO president, who will issue a corrective decision treating the CE, the European Commission decision as a cap. There's also a mechanism called clawback, so you can verify the level of public aid if, after the decision of the President ERO, the internal rate of return goes up in reference to what was presented to the regulator. So this verification and control mechanism from the state, for the state, the public aid not to be excessive, is quite complex. And I'm sure that investors will be looking closely at it, because it plays key importance on setting the profitability of the project in the first stage. As far as the second stage is concerned, it's easier. The strike price is set in auction bids, and we don't have this follow-up notification or verification, sorry. Other than that, we have similar mechanisms. We need to have at least 3 projects in the auction. There's the cutoff rule set at a lower level than onshore. It's 10%, and projects whose location is accepted by the government can participate in the auction. So the legislator decided to categorize the areas to provide some competitiveness between various areas, at least in theory. The key for development of each sector is the long-term development and predictability. Today, the legislator is saying that in 2025 to 2027, we can have auctions at the level of 2.5 gigawatt of installed capacity. A certain problem will be a provision in the Act saying that a year before, these volumes can be reduced. So it's worth considering, at least from the point of view of the law. We shouldn't have this provision. It makes this long-term approach a bit less stable. But let's hope that these volumes will stay put, and also after 2027 the auctions will be taking place with the volumes set by the government. In the long term, we can hope for sizable installed capacity volumes for the Baltic. As far as the investment process is concerned, the Act regulates in detail the rules. Just like onshore, after winning the auction, there are specific deadlines you have to meet. You have to enter the system if you don't want to lose the support. There's a certain schedule imposed by the Act. the rule is that you have to deliver the project 7 years after receiving the aid. And here, it's much more flexible than onshore. The legislator foresaw that in offshore, the investment project can be a bit more complicated, more complex, and investors today applying for support will not really know until the end what hurdles they can have working on the Baltic. So this ability to work in stages or to move this 7-year term is provided for in the Act. So it provides a bit more security and safety to the investors, rather than it is the one set in the RES Act for onshore. As far as other issues are concerned, apart from the support scheme, that's the core of the Act. It also regulates other matters related to investment procedure. It's similar to the so-called special acts we have in Poland. It describes certain solutions facilitating the process. For investors, they have similar rights to PSE, Polskie Sieci Energetyczne. As for the investment and the transmission network are concerned, there are some solutions that facilitate construction work in the sea. So there's a whole list of detailed solutions to facilitate and to streamline the investment process. The Offshore Act also changes to a large extent, refers to a large extent to the Maritime Area Act. This has cropped up a number of times today. On the one hand, they have so-called cleared the permits, seabed permits, or annulling them if they were not in line with the locations set out by the legislator. On the other hand, opening the doors to applying for new locations. So that's the result of entering the Act into force. As far as the key executive regulations, we are still missing a few. You can see this in red. We have this strike price ordinance, but we still don't have a number of ordinances or executive regulations to be issued yet. One related to various stages and the ordinance. That's quite important. And for investors working on their projects, what's important to them are all the technical parameters of exporting power, let's say, from the offshore farm to the grid, or navigation, expert studies related to defense of the country, etc. All the technical requirements or reporting, I'm sure they will have an impact on the investment. The project very important for investors, especially that the first stage projects are being implemented. It would be really good to have these ordinances published as soon as possible, but we're still waiting for that. Now, to sum up, you can ask whether the Offshore Act is perfect, whether nothing should be changed. It's not true, because every legal act which enters into force, well, only when it enters into force do we see some things that should be improved. Everybody's saying about the seabed permits, but people also forget about PUUK, that's the cable permit. So sometimes these cables can overlap, the investors can compete in locating these cables, the collision risk, etc. I'm sure that would require more detailed description, correlating the length or the term for the permit for cable laying versus seabed permits. It would need to be adjusted because the legislator extended some deadlines, but forgot about the permits for seabed cables. The clawback mechanism should be described in more detail because it will have a huge impact on the support scheme, while some wordings cannot allow you to define it in detail from the point of view of interpreting these provisions. So this should be described in more detail. And a number of investment-related projects like geological work in the sea, approving geological works, etc., based on maritime law, should be described at more length. I'm sure that PWA has applied for that, so we should expect that before the work is underway in the sea, these things are cleared out based on this act. That's it from me, just quickly as an introduction, and I wish you a fruitful debate. Thank you.
Bardzo dziękuję, panie mecenasie. Takie mamy wprowadzenie właśnie dobre do tematu.
Thank you very much. Thank you for this introduction to the topic.
Naszą rozmowę
And we'll start our discussion today from regulatory issues.
porozmawiać na ten temat, później przejdziemy
Let me first talk about that,
dostaw portów.
and then we'll talk about the supply chain, the ports, and so on.
Panu prezesowi
And I would like to
Michałowi
ask
Kołodziejczykowi.
this first question to Mr. Michał Kołodziejczyk.
Panie prezesie, reprezentuje pan firmę, która ma
You represent
szereg doświadczeń
a company with
w różnych krajach.
some experiences vast experiences in offshore wind in various countries. And in this context, you can have a more general view on the regulations that we have in Poland. And I would like to ask you, what's your take on the offshore wind regulations in Poland? What is good? What could be improved?
Co można by zmienić, żeby ta
And what could be changed
z morskich farm wiatrowych mogła być jeszcze tańsza?
so that power from offshore wind farms is even more affordable? Thank you very much. Indeed, we are present in Poland from the very beginning of offshore. And I'm very happy that together with our colleagues from the industry and with representatives of the government, that we are able to cooperate and to take part in the development of this regulatory framework. And many regulations from more developed markets have been adopted in Poland. The majority of good solutions from the UK. So summing up the presentation, the contract for difference, CFD that gives price predictability to the investor, the duration of the CFD is excellent, 25 years. Apart from that, streamlining the permitting process, this is a very good step. But at Equinor, we have an expression from ambition to action. So we should move or translate the ambitions in the Offshore Wind Act regarding permitting and procedures needed to develop the project. They have to be processed in required time and at a relevant pace. Because all investors in phase one think about generating first electricity in 2026, 7 or 8. And we can see that there are these time schedules are getting deferred and postponed. So there is no time to wait. All the associated regulations, apart from the Offshore Wind Act, or related to the Offshore Wind Act, should be developed as soon as possible. And an important thing is to try not to come up with some new things, new inventions, but base our regulations on what has been proven in other countries. So we shouldn't come up with new solutions that would lead to cost increases. For example, if we are talking about power export, and we are talking about regulations on what this infrastructure should look like, if we are talking about high level of redundancy that's not encountered elsewhere, this will increase capex and opex, and as a result, it will increase the cost for the customer. And the most important thing with regard to the phase one investors is to align the licenses with
Tak naprawdę
the CFD.
dzisiaj chyba szacowany jest na 23 lata
Licensing time,
pozostałej
the
po
duration of
wyprowadzeniu mocy.
licenses is estimated to be 23 years after the first power export, and the CFD has a duration of 25 years. So it is very important, and these two things should be normalized in an amendment to the act. These are the most important things.
Mamy nadzieję, że te brakujące rozporządzenia
We
zostaną
hope that these missing regulations will be, we hope they are issued in the near future, but as PWEA we can see certain difficulties with time schedule. We do not know why we have this waiting time. The Ministry of Climate has promised that there would be some discussions about the regulation on power export equipment, so there might be some chances for a dialogue in that respect. Thank you very much for this comment, and let me ask the second international investor that we have here, Mr. Holger Mathiesen from RWE.
Chciałabym zapytać, jak z kolei RWE zapatruje się na otoczenie regulacyjne.
What's RWE's take on the regulatory framework for offshore wind in Poland? How do you see these regulations? How do you perceive them?
Camilla, thank you very much for the question and for inviting us. I would like to differentiate between phase 1 and phase 2. And I think for phase 1, I'm still impressed how the Polish government and all the authorization bodies are working on that. And to me, it's a train that has been put on the tracks, and it has started to move. But echoing what Michal has said, there are still some regulations that now come into place in order to help the investors to execute the projects. So that is now of vital importance, including the harbor of Gdynia, that I'm happy to hear from Minister Gryglas will be ready in time, but I think it's now also the time to really start executing. When it comes to phase 2, we observe that quite carefully, and here for us the regulation is more unclear as we speak, and we would welcome opportunities to be more involved as developers in phase 2, and would very much aim for a similar setup as it is in phase 1, where we have a level playing field, and would have the possibility to work between Polish companies, foreign investors, and the respective supply chain. So this for us is a focus area that we would like now to see developing hopefully soon, because what should not happen, and we have observed that in other parts of Europe, if you have an execution of phase 1 and you enter then into some phase of unclarity and there are no follow-up projects. That, I think, is not good for the entire industry, including the supply chain. So what needs to happen is you need to have a constant project development and execution chain, so that the Polish offshore market will develop now over the next 3 or 4 decades.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Holger, for your response and for this concern. Jeżeli mogłabym w takim razie poprosić pana prezesa
If I may ask Mr. Broda
o krótkie odniesienie się może do tych obaw, które przedstawił,
to refer to these concerns expressed by Mr. Holger Mathiesen.
Zdaniem pana prezesa rzeczywiście powinniśmy mieć obawy, że
Do you think
pojawi się taka
that we
niepewność
should be concerned that there will be some investment uncertainty,
w kolejnej fazie nie będą mogli wziąć udziału
and that foreign investors will not be able to take part in the second phase of development of offshore wind in Poland or in the Baltic Sea?
w polskiej części.
We are talking about offshore wind farms to be built in the Polish part of the Baltic Sea.
Zgodzę się przede wszystkim z tym stwierdzeniem, że to jest
Let me agree to the statement that it is of key importance to have clear long-term targets and to implement them, because it is necessary not only for the development of local content, not only for us as developers, but it is also of key importance from the point of view of meeting the broad targets that we have. That is the modernization and decarbonization of the Polish economy, and to have this shift to the good side of the force, of the power. And we've already seen cooperation between Polish and international companies to work very well. There is room for developers from outside of Poland, and it's very good because a bit of competition and a bit of transfer of experiences from more advanced markets is something very good. And I think it's certain that there will be such possibilities in the second phase. What I'm more concerned about is that from the moment that new concessions, new licenses are issued, until the auction for CFD taking place, this might be a challenge for the government administration with issuing all the necessary permits and with running the entire process. Our current concessions, our licenses have been developed for the last 10 years. Well, in terms of dynamic work, it's a solid 4 or 5 years of hard work. And then, depending on when the licenses will be awarded, then the clock will start ticking until the auction. And let me remind you that to take part in the auction, we need to have a well-developed project with finished procurement, with all the permits. And in this context, it seems difficult to manage to do it within the time that's indicated in the law, because nothing is happening with regard to new permits. At least from our point of view, the process has been paralyzed. We are waiting anxiously, all of us here, we are waiting anxiously for this process to start happening. Thank you very much for your answer. And let me ask Ms. Katarzyna Szwed-Lipińska. Director, you've gone through this full process of first phase with all the investors, all the successful projects, because all these projects have been awarded support. And after these experiences, you've probably you've had some conclusions as to how these regulations are designed. And do you believe that they are well designed? And do you think that they will be they are also well designed for future projects? We'll have individual notifications for specific projects and then auctions in a more distant future. What's your assessment of these regulations? Good afternoon. Thank you very much. Welcome. It was one of the better regulatory acts that we've had the pleasure to work with. It's more liberal for the investors than the Renewable Energy Sources Act. Mr. Szambelańczyk has indicated the most important things requiring improvement. From our point of view as a regulator, it is of key importance to execute, to implement this law that does not lead to interpretation doubts. The first phase was handled very smoothly, mainly due to the fact that these regulations had the wording that did not require any interpretation difficulties. There were no doubts. I wouldn't call it a gap, but there is probably some imprecise regulation related to settlement of the volumes declared by investors in the offshore system. It might appear that this Offshore Wind Act is more strict than the RES Act because it requires the settlement of positive and negative balance every year on a yearly basis. But if we look closer at these regulations, there is no clear declaration, as is the case of the RES Act. and there is no clear settlement of that volume. So, for this moment, I believe that this is a very good law, a very good legislation that allowed for good implementation of the regulations. But we can see some need for changes. It can be debatable, but we can see the changes in the formula of collateral. There have been some changes adopted under the amendment of the energy law, but this requires some more precise definition, because it did not cover all the entities, all the stakeholders. So I think this legislation is very good and very pro-investors. In some areas, we could raise the bar even higher, but in my opinion, it's one of the better pieces of legislation that we've had.
Teraz mnie słychać. Ta kwestia rozliczeń
So
salden
the issue of settling the balance was not a part of our postulates, so we look closer into that. From what we know, the Ministry of Climate is planning to amend the Offshore Act within this large adjustment to meet the RED II directive. And at this juncture, maybe these kinks will be ironed out, and maybe some improvements will be introduced. So thank you for the comment. Now I'd like to ask about harbors. We've heard the optimistic declaration from the Minister Gryglas on the construction harbor. We heard his assurance about O&M ports. And I have a question to Ms. Morawiecka about this. So the Council of Ministers has adopted an act selecting Gdynia Harbor as the construction harbor at the end of July. You are within the process of implementing your projects and negotiating with suppliers. Please tell us, is there any chance that you will use the Gdynia Harbor as the construction harbor for the first phase projects? Thank you for the question. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Well, it's very difficult because he introduced me in the way he introduced me, and he said what he said, so the only thing I can do is to be optimistic and to repeat what he said. It seems, but if you know me, you know that I usually tend to cut to the chase, and I won't do that. Let's start from positives. Well, it's true. Well, the fact that the government started working on the issue of the construction harbor and that they have adopted this regulation, that's great. It shows that this has reached a very high level political agenda, and they have worked on it, they have noticed the importance of the issue, and that's great. So that's one thing that forms a good basis we can use for further developments. However, but before I start talking about the buts, why is it significant? Well, we all know, as the members of the industry, we all know that a construction harbor is a special place. As far as the capex value in the whole project, as far as the significance, financial significance, it may not be so important, but since it's a hub, or like a magnet, attracting other parts of the puzzle, or the components of the supply chain, it's like a magnet for local contact. We've been repeating this the early afternoon today. We said the same here in the same room. We spoke about how much we would like to support the Polish industry and to utilize the potential, to tap the potential of Polish industry. And it seems that without such a construction harbor, it will be more difficult. It will not be impossible, but harder. What should we make our lives harder? let's facilitate our lives. So, as a rule, we all agree that we would like to have, and I can repeat what the minister, we cannot imagine doing in any other way than to install or construct wind farms using a Polish harbor. But talking about specifics now, so we have Gdynia as an external construction harbor on the external pier. So it's the infrastructure that is supposed to be built. So that's the vision from the harbor management and the government. The vision is great. It would be great to have this external harbor on time. Based on the plan we have today, for sure it would meet all the requirements, it would tick all the boxes for investors. It will allow us to have operation and maintenance for 2 projects at the same time. It would be there for many years, for the long term, for the long haul. We would very much to have that. And we are hoping it will happen, but well, as investors, we are trying to be more cautious. We have to balance the cost, the schedule, and risks. So we have to juggle all these things. And we have the word risks. I'm talking about the schedule risk for this endeavor. That's a very complicated project, especially in Gdynia, where on top of this project of the harbor, we have the need of building the protection from the waves, digging up the seabed to make it deeper, etc. So that's a huge infrastructural project. Even looking at our wind farms and where we are at today, we have we have many permits. For breakwaters, for example, we have most permits we need for it. We are far up in the design phase, but there's nothing there yet. So our assessment is skeptical, really. Our assessment, from our point of view, looking at the schedule of Baltica 2 and 3 projects, we have a skeptical assessment of the capability of building this external harbor on time for our projects, simply. If it happens, it's going to be great, but, well, on the other hand, Baltica 2 and 3 and other projects at a similar stage of development is not the end. This is merely the beginning of the development of Polish offshore. We've heard about second stage auctions, 2025, 2027. There's a potential announcement that energy policy will be amended to be more ambitious, to place more ambitions in the offshore wind. So this is just the beginning. It's not the end of the world. It's just the first few initial projects will not be on time with the construction of the harbor. The infrastructure will serve further stages for the long term. Another comment. I would just quote representatives of the Gdynia harbor. So in the public, there were articles, there were press articles, how the Gdynia harbor assesses itself, its preparation for this adventure with offshore. And they're saying that the external harbor might not be built on time. They're also preparing an emergency makeshift solution until the external harbor is built. And to quote the representative of the harbor, it might be a good solution for one of the smaller projects. Now we're talking about PG and Ørsted is 2.5 gigawatts. Well, that might be 150, 170 turbines. Doesn't seem to be possible to be done based on the concept of fragmented and distant locations in the harbor, which makes logistics much harder. At the end, another comment, but maybe we should start from, because we're only talking about the construction harbor, and we see or we think this is spectacular. We see turbines, rotors, nacelles, etc., and towers. Well, the construction of wind farms, it's much broader than only turbines, or as much as turbines. We will be constructing foundations as well. We will be installing export cables, internal array cables. We will be installing secondary components, substations. So there's a lot of pre-assembly to be done that can be done in places which will not be right for turbines that will be too small, too narrow, too difficult to navigate, but they can be fit for other components. So there's no easy answer, really. I mean, sorry for taking so much of your time, but there's no easy answer to this question, whether Gdynia is right or not, because it might be Gdynia to a certain extent in a certain configuration for certain components. No, for Gdynia to succeed, for the whole spectrum of the construction of large projects like ours, an external harbor would really need to be built on time. Thank you. I would like to ask Mr. Broda the same question, because your project is also executed within the first phase, and the question is whether do you envisage Gdynia Harbor as a construction harbor for your project? And do you think that if we don't make it on time for first phase projects, does it make any sense to spend the funds for future projects? So is it economically viable, really? We don't know really how offshore is going to develop in Poland in the future, but can we clearly say, yes, let's do that if it's not built on time? Well, thank you. It's true, Baltic Power project is one of the larger projects, 1,200 megawatts, 70 to 80 turbines. So distributed makeshift projects with some interim logistics coming up, well, are just wishful thinking, really. This is not something that could be safely implemented. You have to remember it's not only about money, it's about safety, security, life and health of all the people, onshore and offshore, working with this complex project based on these complex logistics projects. And the requirements are high in this respect. Let me start from the very end. Is it worth building a harbor for the second phase? Yes, for sure. Because the harbor is a hub where various competences mix. Around the construction harbor, infrastructure will develop. So organically, naturally, the local contact will grow and develop. So it's worth a shot. I would say more, it's worth investing into long-term solutions rather, which will give us flexibility. So you'll be able to execute more than one project at the same time, and to use this harbor to construct a new generation of turbines where blades will be 120, 130 meters long. There aren't many internal harbors that could cope with that. Now, what about our project? Well, I can imagine that we will not be using Poland as a base without a Polish harbor. The situation is difficult to the extent, as marked by the minister. We have the supplier market. People compete over projects. You have to contract all of the components in advance. So as a result, you have to present the logistics for the project. We can't wait until 2023 with presenting the solution, especially so that we don't really have too many alternatives in the Baltic. We don't have any in Poland. Now in the surrounding area that could be manageable logistically, there are maybe two foreign solutions available. So we cannot wait. We will just risk having no harbor at all. And without harbor, there will be no business. There will be no project. Also, from the reasons of the state, the projects should be built, should be completed for us to make money and to make our economy greener. So I would very much like to believe that it's built, but it's another matter of faith. It's just a matter of taking the right steps at the right time, investment decisions at the beginning of next year, and a reliable schedule that will allow us to see this external harbor in 2024. I think this will be a challenge, but let's keep our fingers crossed. So, if I understood correctly, you're skeptical about meeting the deadline with Gdynia, but you can use some distributed logistical solutions, only for small projects, not for the big ones like we have, for turbines. For turbines. So generally speaking, it's only Gdynia or foreign harbors for you. If we don't build Gdynia on time, if nothing else happens, there will be no other option. So Mr. Broda would have a similar approach. Now, so you're skeptical about this? Holger Martinsen also wanted to comment on that, so the floor is yours. What does it look like from your point of view?
Yeah, thank you, Camilla. And although I'm probably the only non-Polish here on the stage, I would like to be more optimistic. I think it's still doable, and we are fully motivated to work together with the harbor to bring him into the position to be ready in time. And that is also our experience from previous projects where we have so far always built from a harbor inside the country. And that comes along with a lot of additional, you could say, ownership, motivation, additional interfaces that you could clarify. And to me, since we are now developing one of the, if you like, smaller projects compared to my colleagues here, we still need a kind of a similar setup. Maybe the area doesn't need to be that big, but the quay site has to be the same, the bearing capacities have to be the same, the timeline is probably the same. So so to me, it's not a real difference now between a small and a large project when it comes to a lot of things regarding the harbor. Summarizing, we are fully motivated. We also believe it's still possible, and we would like to offer our help to make it possible together, obviously, with the other investors.
That must be very satisfactory to sit here and as a foreign investor saying that you believe in a Polish port. I envy that optimism. But let's underline that your project is like half or 1/3 of our, and that I want to do. Może przepraszam po polsku. I naprawdę chciałbym podkreślić.
And I would really like to say that there's a difference. If logistics cause delays for a small project, you will still manage to build it within one construction season, while we won't, which leads to huge losses. But it can even break the whole construction for the whole time, for the long term. Because jack-up vessels are not available, and we cannot just extend the construction period as we like.
No dobrze, to teraz pan prezes Kołodziejczyk niech skomentuje jeszcze.
Okay, over to Mr. Kołodziejczyk. I will join RWE in this opinion. I hope that Gdynia will be the first installation harbor, construction harbor. We spoke about that 2 years ago at one of the conferences. We encouraged Equinor to enter Poland, and so I hope that Gdynia gets to work, and I hope they can make it on time. I know that Anna would like me to say that. Regardless of phase one,
między 400 a 500 turbin
We have about 400 to 500
do postawienia
turbines to be built
w przeciągu 3-4 lat.
within a period of 3 to 4 years.
Z angielskiego bottlenecking, po polsku nie wiem, zagęszczenie projektów w czasie.
And we will have some bottleneck or congestion of projects in time. How can Gdynia handle all these projects in this period of time? I don't know. Maybe there is someone in this room who is capable of answering that. For phase 2, amongst others, Gdynia will be necessary, but not only Gdynia. Other markets outside of Poland are developing. The entire Baltic Sea region. I'm thinking about Baltic Sea, Baltic countries, and there's no obstacle for Poland to become an industrial hub for these projects. These projects will be there will be much less of these projects than in our part of the Baltic Sea, so this would make sense. In Poland, phase 2, about 5 gigawatts, and I hope, unfortunately the minister is not with us anymore, but I hope it will not be the end, because there are reports saying that Poland will not only have 10 gigawatts, but will have 20 plus gigawatts. So a port in Gdynia will have a reason to exist, and maybe not only Gdynia, maybe we should think about yet another harbor. Let me also give the floor to Mr. Mariusz Witoński for a word of comment. From the point of view of northern Poland, when you look at ports from close up, what's for you as representatives of the supply chain, what are your opinions on the topic of ports? Are these ports very important? We know that they are, but are they necessary for the supply chain to develop? And how these delays in adjusting the ports, developing the ports, will affect the development of the supply chain? Well, thank you for the invitation and for this question. Indeed, living in the north of Poland, we have an opportunity to look at all these issues from a very close distance. And without unnecessary emphasis, let me say that we are full of frustration. We are boiling with frustration. We are working, we are thinking about the preparation of the supply chain, logistics. We've been working about it for many years, and our calls are falling on deaf ears. Fortunately, it's the investors who are leading this choir of callers. Those who have proven that we will have offshore wind farms in Poland. We have already accepted this fact, although it is a new statement. It is basically a regulatory solution of the last 12 months that allow the investors to close their business plans. Where do we have the supply chain and where is logistics? The supply chain for offshore wind in Poland has been developing since 2007 or 8. It has always been in Poland, and it's still there, it's still here, and it's waiting for this cherry on the pie in the form of the national domestic market. We've been waiting in 2012, 2014. Some companies did not survive to see this solution, but we are finally at the eve of a situation where we will be able to ripe the fruits of all these preparations. Thanks to the completion of these legislative matters, we are certain that these projects will come into reality, and we know more or less when. Many investors are mentioning various risks related to delays. We all have to think about the timing. The bottlenecks of permitting are the most important risks in the completion of these projects, but this timing is also about the challenges for the supply chain that has to be ready not when the projects are starting their execution, but at the latest for the moment when purchasing starts, procurement starts, or even earlier. And it is a challenge for the supply chain, because The supply chain companies are learning about the new rules, new regulations, and new formats that they will have to comply with when supplying products and services to investors. And it is a great experience in transfer from the UK to Poland of this triad, an excellent copy-paste example. Local content, supply chain plan, and sector deal. So these three components of the puzzle, three pieces of the puzzle, we have managed to implement them in the Polish discussion about offshore wind. As you can see, there is no discussion about wind turbines or wind farms, offshore wind farms, without the term local content. Investors have started technical dialogue with Polish companies. It's not only onshore, like 5 or 8 years ago, when most deliveries came from abroad and without the involvement of Polish suppliers. We have secured a certain system and a certain business culture thanks to a very partnership-oriented approach of all participants of this process to think about capabilities of Polish suppliers. The private sector is getting ready as quickly as they could. And the state-owned sector, and state-owned companies, we would like to see them increasing the dynamics of the decision-making process. This is the main burden here. Many state-owned companies, including maritime ports, have the competences, have the knowledge, they have business plans. But the decision-making process that's burdened with various relations, ministerial relationships, it casts a shadow on the dynamics of this process. And I'm coming back to the issue of a port, of the port. The port in Gdynia is, the Port Authority is a state-owned company. I'm talking about the port in Gdynia, but I would like to extend that to all port authorities. Ports are taking part in the discussion about getting ready. The ports are aware of that. Well, ports, some time ago, have already taken some action in terms of planning. However, it's too little too late. The dynamics is not sufficient. It's all delayed. And today we cannot say that we will fully utilize the potential of Polish ports to handle phase 1, the pre-auction phase of offshore wind farm projects. Most probably this scenario will not come into fruition to the extent that we would like it to. The port in Gdynia, regardless of the fact that it formally had such an opportunity, unfortunately, it will not be ready in the form of an outer port, deep water terminal. It will not be able to handle phase 1 projects. It will be some kind of prosthesis of an offshore terminal in the inner port. I'm very happy to hear those voices in the discussion from investors. We cannot have some tunnel vision here, and we cannot expect that the terminal in Gdynia will solve all our problems and that it is the beginning and the end of the discussion about ports for offshore wind in Poland. In Poland, for phase 1 and phase 2, I hope that there will be a smooth transition between phase 1 and 2. We need more than one installation terminal. If we look in a broader way on the Tri-City ports and the West Coast ports, if we see now that there's a problem with timing for the ports of the Gdańsk Bay, let's get to work in the western part of our coast and in Szczecin and Świnoujście with regard to an installation terminal devoted to phase 2. We know that it will gravitate towards the west. We need a terminal. To have an installation terminal, we need to have have a broader point of view and a more comprehensive view. A certain problem here is that the only owner of the offshore wind in Poland, in terms of political decision-making, is the Ministry of Climate. Unfortunately, the ministry responsible for the economy and the ministry responsible for maritime economy has entered the discussion in a very delayed moment. But we hope that they will push the pedal, the accelerator pedal, and we hope that we can still have the process of mapping and adjusting the Polish ports to handle the first phase projects. And this will require the use of both Gdynia and Gdańsk to the extent that it is possible. We also need to pay attention to O&M, to service ports that are of key importance to Poland. Installation ports, well, in the worst-case scenario, they can be contracted abroad. O&M service ports can only exist in the direct vicinity of these of wind farm locations. I don't know that there are only 2 instead of 3 or 4 service ports in governmental documents. Władysławowo is one of the ports that deserves our attention. It's not included in the governmental documents, but it's probably the best suited harbor in terms of infrastructure for a service port. The same applies to West Coast ports, including smaller ports from Świnoujście to Mrzeżyno, Kołobrzeg and Darłowo. Already now, these ports should join a broad operation of preparing a comprehensive offer of infrastructure, of port infrastructure. Both service and installation ports in Poland, they are certainly needed to handle the projects. And it is just a short episode in the project development, but they also needed to serve as hubs of investments, investments from companies that will support the construction and operation phase for decades ahead. There are international examples confirming that. Bremerhaven, the mecca of offshore terminals, it was indicated as a role model over the last decade. One figure, 100 million invested by the state budget. So with 100 million of investments from the state authorities, there were 400 million investments from the supply chain companies. And we expect this type of influence, of impact for service ports in Poland. But this is possible only when these ports are built at 2 minutes to midnight, just before the construction starts. We want to have adequate planning and in a way that will optimize the opportunities, not only for completion of projects without unnecessary risks, but also the opportunities for the Polish economy, for the Polish industry and the Polish labor market. Thank you.
Dziękuję bardzo. Jeszcze chciałabym zapytać.
Thank you very much. I would just like to ask about one more thing.
Rozumiem, że jeżeli chodzi o porty
I
instalacyjne,
understand that as far as construction harbors are concerned,
to się okaże
we will
za
see
długi czas, czy będzie
soon
ten port w Gdyni
whether
wykorzystać.
the Gdynia harbor can be used for this purpose. But a question about O&M ports. Can you even operate and maintain offshore wind farms from outside of Poland? Is it technically viable? Do they really need to be located in Poland? If they are not adjusted, what's going to happen? Maybe a question to our investors, if somebody's willing to speak.
Nie chciałbym odpowiedzieć na to, czy te
I would like to say whether wind farms can maintain themselves. I don't know, but
czuję tutaj tak taką nutę, że oczekujemy znowu,
that I can feel the expectation that the state will build O&M harbors for us.
Chciałbym tutaj wrócić do tego,
Let me return to the decision by Equinor in Poland.
Kupiliśmy
We
działkę
bought a plot of land in Łeba
zamierzamy przystosować
that we want to
portu serwisowego i obsługiwać
prepare
nasze projekty.
and to build an O&M
Myślę, że to jest dobra
harbor
droga,
there
tak, żeby
just
deweloperzy
to maintain our projects. I think that's the good way to go. Investors should look for harbors themselves and start rebuilding them, repurposing them from the point of view of being O&M harbors. As Mr. Witański mentioned, it's a part of building the supply chain, creating interesting jobs, not only for the installation campaign for a year or two, but for the next 20, 30 or even more years. So let's focus on the long term. As offshore in the Baltic develops as a whole, these harbors could fill up almost the whole shore, seashore, obviously in a reasonable way, and to create highly specialized expert jobs for decades to come. Now, Holger
na temat portów serwisowych.
Valentin about O&M ports. Would you like to comment on that?
Yes, I would like to. Thank you. So to me, an operations harbor is a completely different story, and here it's obviously also about quayside and water depths, but it's more about people. So our experience with all the offshore wind farms that we are currently operating is you need a team that basically feels it's their baby. And that is why we also believe we need to find a good operational port in Poland for our Polish offshore wind farms. And then we will have a dedicated operations team be based in this harbor, and they will go out to their turbines, and it's their turbines. They are going to maintain them. They are going to repair them. And that for sure will do good to a long-lasting operational lifetime and also to an excellent production performance.
Czy jeszcze Państwo, Pan Prezes Jarosław Broda?
Would you like to take the floor? Yes, Mr. Broda. I agree. An operation harbor is a different story, and we are not waiting for the government at all. We're not looking what they're doing. We are just preparing both the harbor. We also think about Łeba. We like Łeba a lot. We are preparing an O&M harbor. So this is within our hands, and I think it will be done based on Polish harbors. I cannot just imagine covering such huge distances to service farms. I'm optimistic about it, beyond any doubt. These farms will be operated and maintained using Polish harbors. I concur. I agree with everything, with one reservation that the infrastructure of these smaller harbors is not made of rubber. It's not like that everybody's going to fit in a single harbor. From this point of view, we could point to the government. There are certain locations which are preferred, and maybe they should direct the funds for development of the harbors. We do have such development programs both for Łeba and Ustka. There are investment plans, but, well, quote unquote, they are nice to have, but they are not must-haves. So today I would say that, okay, we're going to cope with the O&M harbor more or less optimally, but for sure we will be able to maintain and operate Polish offshore farms from the Polish shore. Now, Ms. Lipińska, would you like to comment? I've been listening to this debate from the point of view of our interrelations and the obligation of the entrepreneur to start selling electricity. There is a whole list of risks on the side of the generator. Once I heard the statement that the ball is in the park of the generators, of the entrepreneurs. We're waiting for the farms, but all the risks can be so huge that entrepreneurs will decide to go for different solutions, for the farms to be built at the right time. So this is understandable to us. All of us present here, I'm sure, would like to give some momentum to the economy at the time of building the offshore market, to have a win-win, to have as many Polish entrepreneurs on board. I'm sure there are many excellent people who would be great workers here, great employees, but there's always the risk of starting the business within the requirements of the law. Even though the act is quite liberal here and the entrepreneur has a lot of leeway in shifting the deadlines, but it's not about this. We want the farms to be built at the right time, to not only be a part of the Polish, the growth of the Polish economy, but also be a part of the Polish energy policy and climate policy. I'd like to ask you about the impressions about the planned supply chains submitted to your institution during the application for support. I'm sure, I know that you cannot give us the details, but what's your general impression? Was the quality of the documents satisfactory? Was there any meaningful content in these documents? Obviously, they included a lot of content. You could see a lot of determination to show the will to involve as many suppliers from the Polish side. I'm sure that the time will show whether these assumptions were right. Some of them were too ambitious from the point of view of this bottleneck that you mentioned. We've heard that they will be built at the same time, more or less. So some assumptions related to the use of the local content are exaggerated and overestimated, but we for sure see the will of the foreign and Polish investors to use the capabilities of the Polish economy to the possible extent. Obviously, it's different for turbines, where we can see that we have no experience. It's different for the construction of foundations. Obviously, we can categorize the whole farm into segments. We can see that the involvement of the local content is different. And all these documents included certain potential levels and shown the will of investing in Poland. And the entrepreneurs were very much involved in the creation of these plans and the negotiations, discussions, and conferences that were presenting offshore to the whole Polish industry. The requirements, the schedules, the timelines for building such facilities. The good solution is that in these supply chains we have at least estimated schedules for investment projects. The market sees that, it's published, and the market sees at what time some steps will be taken. And from your point of view, it's very often updated on the websites of various investors. So there's the will of cooperating with the Polish sector, but at this moment it's difficult to say how many of these assumptions of future beneficiaries will come to fruition. Let's hope that as many as possible, but from my point of view, it's very important for these farms to be built in a reasonable time frame. Thank you for the comment. It is true that there's a single voice of investors saying that the supply chain should be developed, that the development must be supported. It's great that it's also reflected in the plans, that these are not only declarations in the media.
Mam tu jeszcze
Now, against
pytanie
this
do
backdrop, I have a question to all our panelists
o tę umowę sektorową,
about
która
the
ma być
sectoral agreement that is
podpisana,
supposed to be signed
niedługo, bo już
soon
15 września.
on September the
jeszcze,
15th.
Przynajmniej ja
Well,
nie znam jeszcze
I
tych ostatecznych
don't know
wartości,
the
jakie w tej
final
umowie mają
values
się
to be
znaleźć,
input.
do
I don't know the
poziomu
ambition
no, ale powiedzmy,
level for
że dla
local
pierwszej
content.
fazy
But let's say for the first
spodziewać
phase,
się
we can
około
expect around
20-30%
20-30% of local content.
W kolejnym etapie
In the second
około
phase, around
50%.
50%.
Chciałabym po kolei
Now,
Państwa zapytać, poczynając
I
od
would like you to take
pana
turns,
prezesa
starting from
Witońskiego,
Mr. Witoński,
o to,
to take turns in answering the question whether these values are achievable from your point of view, whether the issue of the construction harbor impacts
na ich osiągnięcie.
the possibility of achieving these objectives.
Umowa sektorowa
The sectoral agreement,
prowadzi do
that's true,
dyskusji publicznej na temat morskiej energetyki
will
wiatrowej.
present offshore to the public,
Kluczowe być może
the offshore energy, offshore wind to the public.
swego rodzaju deklaracje rynku odnośnie
So the
tego,
declaration of the market on the extent of using the local supply chain.
Wybiegając trochę przed orkiestrę,
Going a bit further,
można powiedzieć, że udało nam się osiągnąć
or stepping out of line, I would say that we have achieved a consensus on setting
branżowej
the
oczekiwanej wartości,
expected value
oczekiwanej i
in the industry and achievable
dla poszczególnych faz rozwoju
for various stages of development of the market. I mean, the value of local content. We set it at 25 to 35% for the pre-auction phase, 45% for the phase 2, with a cap up to 2030, and 50% after 2030. I'm just talking about things that are still a work in progress, that we still have not seen the final document. It seems that the consensus
rzeczywisty potencjał.
reflects the real potential well. PWM, PTF, MFE
raport
commissioned a report
aktualne
on
możliwości
the current
pozyskania konkurencyjnych wartościowych
possibility of sourcing valuable bids from the Polish market, and at the moment the level is around 25%. That's the estimate. You know that the technical dialogue with the industry started in the meantime, led to a huge increase in the awareness on the industry side on what's going to be required, with what parameters and when. Unfortunately, we still don't have enough time to utilize the knowledge for the increase of production capacity adjusted to the requirements of the market, but it seems that we can rest assured that 25% is the minimum that should be achieved. Now, reviewing the market, we know that it might even reach 35%. Now, even what about Gdynia harbor? It's difficult to estimate the impact of using Gdynia in one form or the other. For sure, should this harbor be built on time, if it's contracted for the construction phase, at best 2 or 3 years before it happens, for sure we would allow entrepreneurs to focus their new efforts, new development around the harbor. At the moment, we cannot be sure that this process will be optimal. However, the indication of Gdynia itself, or any role of the harbor, will have an impact on new businesses being established there, and it's already happening for the offshore wind. Unfortunately, we won't have this key impact of a harbor, which is built on time, organizes the whole supply chain. We'll have like a hybrid, like a makeshift solution, But still, it will be quite effective from the point of view of impacting the supply chain. Now, what about the future, or rather the prospects for the future? As far as the supply chain is concerned in Poland, we've built the right skills to locate our offer around the world, even on the most competitive offshore wind markets in Europe and outside of Europe. I mean, the production of cables here, I mean, the construction of specialized vessels, jack-up vessels. I'm talking about the transformer factory in Łódź. These are just a few examples. The list goes on. It's impossible to list them all, but it's the right foundation to build the right level of local content. However, when and how and to what extent this is going to materialize, and whether we will be able to contribute to 35% will depend whether we will pass on from the level of offering the construction of a substation to a fully equipped substation. From small logistical services in the harbor to full servicing of the construction process, taking into account the construction fleet and operation and maintenance using our local Polish O&M fleet. That's the issue of extending the scope of cooperation with key technological suppliers. I mean wind turbines here mainly. So that in Poland we have complementary to the existing facilities. Now, due to the scale of the market, it would be even great to have an assembly facility for generators dedicated for offshore. But for Polish companies, it's as important as servicing the Polish market will be entering for the long term the supply lists for turbine manufacturers that serve the global market. This is where we should see our ambitions. And I do hope the Polish companies will be permanent participants of this market. There's a rapid learning curve of investors. We do hope that what they're doing in Poland is just the first step. Just as we heard the session before us, maybe ahead of us there will be some external expansion, hoping that we will use the Polish supply chain. Thank you. Now I'd like to ask all of you, all the investors, to comment on that. Are you planning to sign the sector deal on September the 15th? Do you think that these values are achievable? And I'd like to ask Mr. Broda to comment on the expansion, because I heard that you have some plans to also build offshore outside of Poland. So if you could just take turns and your comments. Thank you.
Yeah, happy to comment. So number one, the sector deal, as we see it, is an excellent initiative by the Polish government. And we as RWE are very happy and looking forward to sign it on the 15th of September as it is planned. But I think it's also fair to say Poland has already an excellent offshore supply chain. And I'm not sure whether that is known to all of you, but although there is no offshore wind farm under construction or operation in Poland, there are a lot of companies in Poland that are already delivering goods, supply and service to the European offshore industry. And that is because they serve it in a competitive manner and with excellent quality. So for example, we are currently constructing a wind farm in Germany called Kaskasi, and the electrical offshore substation, the structure of this has been just built in Poland. Yeah? And that is obviously the heart of an offshore wind farm. And without this Polish company, it wouldn't materialize. So compared to other countries, we are happy to sign the sector deal here in Poland, but it's based already on a foundation of a lot of valuable companies that likely do not even need it, but we are still happy to contribute because it will for sure increase the number of suppliers.
Thank you, Holger. Good to hear.
My również cieszymy się z tej
We're
rządowej,
also happy about this
rządowej inicjatywy,
government initiative.
Dobry local content oczywiście
Good
wspiera
local content obviously supports the construction, operation and functioning of Polish farms. From the point of view of developers, that's a plus. After long debates, the levels mentioned are realistic, but they are not simple to achieve, especially the higher values, but we are determined to fight for them. It is true that in Poland, according to our estimates, around 400 companies that today supply components for offshore, outside of Poland, obviously.
Ja bym tylko zwrócił uwagę na to, że myślę, że naszym celem w Polsce
one thing we have to remember is that our objective should not be to supply as many components for Polish wind farms as possible, but to build a whole industry which will be exporting these solutions.
Dlatego też to jest szczególnie cenne,
So this is extremely valuable if Tier 1 suppliers in their supply chains take Polish suppliers on board, because they will be using them in projects outside of Poland. So yes, we will achieve these objectives. Now maybe a few words about the expansion and your investment plans. I can reiterate what Mr. Bajtek said, that both in Poland, Orlen has large ambitions. We would try to get new licenses, but we would also like to be a significant player in the Baltic Sea, broadly understood, not only in Poland. We think about the east and west of Poland. It's one of the strategic axes, both of energy transformation of Orlen within our strategy, as well as the transformation of the business model with time. Thank you very much. Now quickly, Mr. Kołodziejczyk.
Zastanawiam się, co powiedzieć krótko.
So let me respond briefly. A sector deal is an agreement. It is a negotiated understanding or agreement between the parties, and the parties commit or undertake to execute that agreement in a certain period of time. We are very happy to see that, but we need to remember that developers undertake to build wind farms in phase 1 and hopefully in phase 2, if foreign investors are allowed to participate.
Oprócz tego strona administracji rządowej zobowiązuje się do tego, że
the government side undertakes to allow investors to execute their investment projects by streamlining the permitting process and providing the services and the manning of governmental agencies processing these permits and allowing for time schedules to be complied with. And the entrepreneurs, if they see that the government has set specific targets to itself, not for one or 2 years, but for 10 or 15 years into the future, especially with regard to the number of volume of gigawatts in Poland, and they will be willing to invest their resources in new technologies, new employees, in discussions with foreign partners, about technology transfer, and to get ready to this participation in the sector deal and then in the supply chains. And eventually, all the parties to the sector deal will be happy. This is exactly what is happening in the UK. And thanks to that, it is thanks to the sector deal that we see a very strong development of the local supply chain in the UK. But as Mr. Broda has said, they are also focusing on international expansion and exports of their services and technologies to foreign countries. And we hope that this sector deal will have a similar character in Poland. Ms. Morawiecka. Very briefly, in the very end, we are also very happy with this sector deal, and we are willing to sign it on the 15th of September. As for the percentage levels, they have not been set in stone, but I prefer to be more cautious or conservative and then brag about exceeding the targets than apologizing for not meeting them. So we want to have a responsible approach. It's not difficult to declare something. It is difficult to meet the declarations afterwards. We often mention the UK and we refer to the fact that quite many companies, Polish companies, are already parts of the supply chain, like the steel structures for transformer stations. We need to take one step further. It's not just about thinking a certain topside steel structure, but a fully fledged, fully equipped transformer station that could be developed and manufactured by Polish companies. So this would be the next step of development of local content. This is something that we do not have a solution to. And the UK has already taken that step further. They provide direct support for the industrial sector, not the developers of wind farms, but they support the companies who want to become part of the supply chain and who want to grow in that respect. This is something that we are not discussing yet, but we already should, because after signing the sector deal, we might have to start thinking about this next stage and not just reaping the profits of what we have already. It is a good remark. After signing the document, there is a discussion, a debate planned by the ministry to look into the future. And we are also proposing an accompanying event where there will be a dinner reception and roundtable discussions, because we will continue to have working groups and we will have to implement that sector deal to make it to transform it into reality. So most of us will meet on the 15th of September. Just one final question to Ms. Szwedlipińska. I would like to ask you whether individual notifications have already started. I cannot confirm, I can't deny. Well, I've asked this question, but I know that we might not receive a clear answer. But thank you very much. I would like to thank all of you for taking part in this discussion. I think that we have gone through the most important topics in offshore wind that are currently on the table. And please join us at the cocktail party, and of course you're all invited to take part in tomorrow's sessions. We also have an offshore session during the main panel discussion, main plenary session. So we'll be able to come back to Minister Gryglas with the conclusions that we have drawn today. So thank you very much for taking part in this session.